I totally wrote out an introduction for today's episode, not.
Yay!
Whoops. Miranda is gone this week. Rachel's gone last week. Rachel's back today.
I'm back. I'm here.
Yeah.
Alive, barely.
She's barely alive.
Alive, but still here.
This is an apocalyptic situation. Miranda's on vacation, and Rachel and I are going to be talking about young adult horror books. Because this is stuff we love. And basically, we're just going to discuss a couple books that we love and just tell you what we think about them and some things that are important we think about them and just have fun with it. So Rachel is going to go first because I've been talking so much lately. I'm so tired of hearing my voice on these recordings and editing everything I say, uhs and ums and likes out. So I would really love to hear a different voice. So Rachel's going to tell us about her book first.
Yay! Alright, the book that I picked is one of my favorite, I guess you call it middle grade books, but it's Wait Till Helen Comes by Mary Downing Hahn. This book came out, I want to say the year I was born, so this book is 30 years old. I probably read it when I was 7 or 8 for the first time, and then I did reread it again when I worked at the bookstore, maybe 4 years ago, and it's still really enjoyable as an adult. Most of her books are ghost stories, spooky books, books about murder, that kind of thing. So anyways, this book is about this family that moves into this house, and the house is right next to a graveyard. And this is a blended family, so you have a dad and daughter, and the mom has died. The father has remarried a stepmother, and she has 2 kids of her own. So the daughter of the father, her name's Heather, she's the main character, she does not like her stepmother. She's mad, that her dad has remarried, as is typical in not just these kinds of books, but real life. So she is out in the graveyard one day, and she sees this ghost named Helen, and she and Helen are the same age, and they find that they have a lot in common. They find that they were both involved, that there was a fire that affected both of them. Heather's mother died in a fire, and then Helen says that she also was in a fire, and she had family members that died there. So, as time goes on, Helen starts to tell Heather, no one understands you like I do, no one cares about you the way that I do, etc., etc. And she gives Heather the locket that she wore when she was alive. So, as time goes on, Heather, of course, is still pissed off about this stepfamily, so she starts causing problems. She starts lying about her stepbrother and stepsister doing things that they're not doing. They're older than her. She's trying to basically get her father and her stepmother to get a divorce. And she starts threatening her stepbrother and stepsister with Helen. She starts saying, there's a ghost in the graveyard, and the ghost is going to get you if you don't leave, and all that kind of thing. And so one day the whole family is out, and when they come back, Helen, the ghost, has come in while they're gone and destroyed everything that belongs to the stepfamily. So just the mother and the 2 step-siblings.
Great.
And of course they all think it was Heather.
Yep.
The stepbrother does not believe in the ghost, but the stepsister does. And so she's trying to find proof, and of course she's telling her mother and her stepfather, there's a ghost, we're being haunted, and they're just like, no, you just have an overactive imagination. Heather is just lashing out because she's not happy, but there's no such thing as ghosts. So the step-siblings end up going to the library, and they find out that Helen is real. She's a real person, which confirms what the stepsister already knew, and that Helen's mother and stepfather died in a house fire, and Helen managed to crawl out of the house fire, but she's only 7 years old, so she fell into a pond behind the house and she drowned. And one of the librarians tells them, since then, 3 or 4 other children have also drowned in that pond.
Oh.
Yeah. a few days after this, the parents go into town, because of course they live in the country, as you always do in these stories, and Heather disappears. And the stepsister goes on this big search for her, because she knows that something bad is going to happen. And she finds her at the house where Helen and her family died. When she gets to the house, she sees Heather and Helen sitting by the lake, and Helen is starting to get angry with Heather because Heather does not want to drown herself. She says she loves her father, she doesn't want to leave him, and she's afraid of dying. And Helen straight up tells her, your father stopped loving you the minute he married your stepmother. He doesn't care about you anymore. And if you drown yourself, then you and I can be together forever. Heather finally agrees, and both she and the ghost jump into the pond. So the stepsister jumps in after them, and as the ghost is attacking the stepsister to try and stop her from saving Heather. Their names are so similar. Heather, Molly rips Helen's locket off of Heather and throws it further into the pond, and Helen, of course, goes after it because that's like the source of her power. Molly, which that's the stepsister's name, I don't know if I mentioned that, but Molly saves Heather, and when Heather wakes up, she has to do mouth to mouth, she tries to jump back into the pond to finish drowning herself, and Molly kind of drags her into Helen's abandoned, burned down house. So when they get into the house, the floor collapses. They end up in the basement, of course, and they find the skeleton of Helen's mother and stepfather. And Heather explains that Helen accidentally started the fire that burned her house down.
Mm-hmm.
She and her stepfather were having an argument, and Helen got really animated, and of course this was 100 years ago, so she knocked over an oil lamp.
Oh.
Burned the house down. And then Molly asks Heather, well, your mother died in a fire. Did you start that fire? And she did, by mistake. She was only like 3 or 4 when her mother died, and she was messing with the stove, and her mom was busy and didn't know, and she started the fire, and she got out, and her mom couldn't get out of the house.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So Helen comes down into the basement, and this is the first time that she's seen the skeletons of her parents. And the ghosts of her mother and her stepfather appear, and they all embrace and disappear. And that helps Heather realize that if Helen's mom could have forgiven her, then her father can forgive her for starting the fire that killed her mother. She tells her father, I'm the one that accidentally started the fire. And of course he knew the whole time, but he tells her that he forgives her. It wasn't her fault, it was an accident. And at the end, the whole step family has kind of come to terms with each other, and they find Helen's locket with a note that says, don't forget me, and they know that Helen is at peace, and that's how the book ends. So, this book, the main character is 7. You and I were kind of discussing before we started, but I would not recommend this book for 7-year-olds. I probably read it at 7 or 8. I did not understand the, nuances of the plot at 7 or 8 probably. Definitely as an adult I did. I would recommend this book for maybe, 10 and up. It has some pretty fucked up stuff in it for a kid's book. You have a little girl who's, fighting to try and drown herself and has to be dragged to safety by her stepsister. It's pretty screwed up. But one of the, I think this book does a good job of touching on a lot of things that affect kids. Having the blended family. All of a sudden you have these brand new siblings that have their own lives already, and you're trying to bring everybody together. And it does a really good job, I think, of dealing with depression in children, which is not a topic that's always discussed. Obviously, depression in teens and older gets a lot of thought. Depression in children, mental health in children, I think does not get a lot of attention, or not as much attention as it deserves.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty clearly, Heather is depressed in this book.
Yeah.
She has all of this guilt for what she did, or what she accidentally did, I should say. And, her trying to drown herself seems like a natural extension of that, even without the ghost. And it also does a really good job, I think, of dealing with the death of a parent and kind of how horrible that is. And just how, you get this sense that Heather and her father have never really talked about what happened. That it's just easier for them if nobody talks about it. But of course, that's incredibly unhealthy. And nobody gets better if nobody talks about it.
Oh
so, overall, this book it's really well written. It's really still enjoyable if you're an adult reading it for the first time. It's got some spooky parts, but her books are very, very, very good. All of them. I've read probably all of her books, and I can't think of one that I didn't like.
I really like that you described she describes the ghost as, completely unsympathetic because she's trying to get all these kids to drown themselves, but then, there's this whole backstory that's making her do this, and...
Oh, yeah, you definitely feel... the reason that the ghost is getting these kids to drown themselves is because she's lonely. She has nobody. And when these kids drown themselves and die, I guess in theory they also become ghosts. You never see the other kids, but I guess... that's sort of the point, and then she has people to be with.
Yeah, it seems like she's kind of relying on the uncertainty of how the afterlife works, that she doesn't know, like maybe this one will become a ghost, or maybe,
exactly.
Or maybe, this relationship will be perfect now.
And I think that Helen also can't process what she did, and she can't process her grief. And so this helps her as well. This idea that, these other people are in pain just like I am, and I'm helping them feel better by helping them kill themselves. Heather's life is miserable, and she's stuck with this evil stepmother, just like I was stuck with this stepfather that I hated. And so I'm going to help her. This is really for the best. But obviously that's really twisted and not the case. Apparently this was also made into a movie, which I just saw. Wikipedia. I have not seen it, but I kind of want to watch it now.
When was it made?
Last year.
Really?
That's insane, considering this book came out 30 years ago.
Why didn't that get more press? Because I feel like kids are still, I still have kids coming into the bookstore going, I need a scary story.
Oh, and this was always the first one that I gave out when I worked at the bookstore.
Yeah.
For books, really.
Or anything by Mary Downing Hahn. It's Mary Downing Hahn, right?
Yeah. I've read 3 or 4 other ones that she wrote. Another one I would really recommend came out, maybe only 5 or 6 years ago. It's called Mr. Death's Blue-Eyed Girls.
Ooh.
Based on something that happened to her when she was a kid. These 2 girls that she kind of knew got murdered, and they never solved it, and so that's what this is about. But that was a really good one too. I
just need to read all of her books now.
They're so good.
Did she write one about a Civil War soldier?
She did.
That's the one I read.
But I can't remember which one that was.
I can't remember. We're talking I was 7 or 8 years old when I read that.
Oh, yeah.
So.
I know I read, there's one that's The Doll in the Garden. I read that one. I read Deep and Dark and Dangerous, but that came out maybe 10 years ago. So I must have read that when I was at the bookstore.
Mm.
But, oh my god, yeah, no, she wrote Time for Andrew. Did you ever read Time for Andrew?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Oh, Time for Andrew, I don't think it takes place during the Civil War, but it's a modern day at the time that it was written. Goes into the past and changes places with his great uncle who's dying of TB or diphtheria or something.
Ooh.
Yeah, her books are so good. I just recommend all of them. That one's not really scary, but even her ones that aren't scary are still great. As far as I know, I've never read a dud. They do a good job, I think, of exploring kind of more adult themes. You almost feel like a lot of them were kind of ahead of their time, because now that's pretty common in YA and middle grade books to explore these, more serious themes, which do affect teens and kids and have always affected them. But for a long time, I think there was this sense of, children's books should just be, happy because you're a kid and you should be happy when you're a kid. Not every kid's life is great.
There are certain people who I work with who believe that is true, and that if they don't believe a book seems like it's for a kid, even though if it's meant for a kid, then they'll put it in YA instead of children's.
Right.
I think,
which to me is bizarre, because children deal with this stuff too. I mean, children deal with depression and death and abuse and everything just as much as teens and adults.
yeah, you can't cut it off from children because, I mean, maybe in theory a child's life is supposed to be perfect until they have to deal with everything that adults deal with, but it's not going to happen in 99% of all cases.
Exactly. That's my big thing with it. It's like, of course you want your child's life to be perfect and happy and no conflicts and no drama, but that's not the way that life works. Life doesn't care what you want.
Yeah. Well, I think people think that because it's fiction, we should be able to, relegate it to a certain category and have it stay there because we can dictate that. But I think a lot of the authors don't intend that. I mean, genre is primarily a marketing tactic.
Right.
It's like...
Well, go ahead.
No, I mean, just frustration is all I'm expressing.
No, it is. It is frustration. And I understand the instinct, I guess you could say, to want to make children's books happy because if we present this kind of idealized, and of course there's tons of happy children's books, and they're great too, but to say that they all have to be happy because even if you have problems, it can take your mind off of it, that's true, but if you're having problems, it's also nice to read books about other people who are having the same problems because it makes you feel less alone.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a kid and you don't know how to express these feelings because you're a kid. It's nice to read books that are like, wait a minute, it's not just me? Like, I'm not the only one that feels this way? I'm not the only one that's going through this? I don't quite understand that instinct that we have to protect children. I mean, children are stronger than people think they are.
Oh, yeah. Well, I wasn't as a child, but I know many children are.
Oh, no. I mean, I cried all the time.
I was a wimp as a kid.
Oh, yeah. I cry all the time now as an adult. I mean, it's fine.
But, also pretending that problem isn't there doesn't make it go away.
Exactly.
So, what's the point, really? I don't understand.
Yeah, no, exactly. So her books, I feel like, were almost a little... I mean, there are other books, obviously, from that time period that also dealt with these themes, but it wasn't as commonplace as it is now in middle grade and YA books. So her books are highly recommended. This book is great. It's spooky, it's fun, it's a little sad, but most of her books are. But definitely still enjoyable as an adult, which to me is the mark of a really great children's book. If you can still read it as an adult and like it, then it's a great book.
Oh, yeah.
And not just a great children's book, but a great book in general.
And thankfully, there are so many that I can still read that... Sometimes even more... Lately I've been reading Neil Gaiman, and I read a couple of his books, and I was just like, it was a breath of fresh air, because I was like, oh god, yes, this is like something that's gonna last, and this is something that's resounding, and this is something that makes me feel like I should feel when I read a book.
Right.
And there are so many children's books that do make me feel that way, like Tuck Everlasting. I just regifted it to one of my friends, and I was like, I am gonna bawl my eyes out. I read Tuck. We had to read it in school when I was in maybe like 4th grade-ish.
I can't remember. It was probably a different time, but sometime in grade school we had to read Tuck Everlasting, and oh my god, I cried. And my mom, she used to read the books that I was reading in school, and that book made her cry too.
Oh god, yes.
I mean, Tuck Everlasting. We could do a whole podcast
I
on
know.
that. I love that book. I love it so much. And just how it realistically presented eternal life as being really shitty.
Yeah.
Like, sucks.
I almost did that one for this, but I thought, no, this doesn't count, and I really need to, smack myself on the hand when it comes to this, because I think that we're trying to present the horror genre and what shouldn't be the horror genre and everything is sort of a more widespread thing than people think. Everything contains an element of horror. Everyone's scared of death, Right. There's a little bit of that feeling with that, like that copper taste in your mouth with some things that aren't supposed to be horror. So.
Yeah. Yeah, oh my god, Tuck Everlasting.
It's a freaking masterpiece, and if you haven't read it, just read it. It'll take you maybe 2 hours to read it.
Yeah.
Just make that part of your life.
Yeah.
I think, like, we could almost make this YA and children's horror thing an ongoing series because there's so many different things. Okay.
I've kind of talked enough, I think, about mine.
Yeah.
But I'm excited for yours because I love this book.
It is just so interesting that we both picked books with such similar themes.
I know.
Because there are just so many YA horror books that we could have picked. And I actually hadn't read this book until a week ago. I actually finished it yesterday. But I decided I knew I was going to love it, and I'd been meaning to read it for so long, and I decided I needed to read this for the podcast. So I did The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman, and I have to say it's a book that is now very dear to my heart, and I knew it was going to be. God, there's so many things to talk about with this book. I don't want to give everything away, of course, because part of it is the book's a mystery in a way. So you're trying to figure out what's happening, and I don't want to give anything away about that, and what I'm going to talk about really isn't relevant to the mystery element of the book. So, quick summary of the novel. It's about this child whose parents are brutally murdered one night, and he escapes. He's a toddler. He's like 2 or 3. And
yeah, because he's still in a crib, so he's got to be like 2 or under.
And he's been known to be a child who likes to get out of things. So he climbs out of his crib and climbs down the stairs and out the door, and he wanders up the hill to the graveyard. And at the graveyard gate is the ghost of a woman, and the ghost of the woman takes the toddler in, and there's a big meeting of the ghosts in the graveyard, and the woman fights for the child to be given what they call the freedom of the graveyard. And she wins, and she and her husband are the guardian of this living toddler until such time as he has grown old enough to leave the graveyard. And they call this toddler Nobody Owens because they don't know his first name, and their last name of the couple who has died is Owens. So they call him Nobody Owens, Bod for short. And the killer of his family, he was supposed to kill the whole family, and he's let the toddler escape, so that's a big mistake. And he follows the toddler up the hill to the graveyard and is never able to find this toddler. So the looming threat while Bod is growing up is this man who's been trying to kill the whole family going to come back and kill him? I don't even know where to start with this book. It's just so everything I wanted out of a book about a graveyard. So I did a workshop with some high schoolers, area high schoolers, while I was finishing up my senior year at Western. And I decided to do a workshop on Riverside Cemetery, which is our cemetery in Moline. And I started spending a lot of time there, like all cool kids do. And I decided there are certain things that are important about cemeteries to everyone that maybe not everybody knows. And so these high schoolers were supposed to write about the cemetery in some capacity by the time we'd finished the workshop. And this is an abbreviated version of the lecture I gave them before we went out to the cemetery. Me knowing that a lot of people don't think about cemeteries being there. Like, this is a place we go when somebody dies and we have to bury them, not a place where we go to hang out anymore. So some things that are important to all of us, whether we know it or not, about cemeteries are preservation of history. Like, all of our local history is embodied in these cemeteries. If you go to any one of our cemeteries, you're going to find names that made the communities that we live in. One of ours in particular being John Deere. The cemetery I lectured about was the cemetery where John Deere is buried. And so that's hugely important. Like, he was important while he was alive, but now he's on a hill and nobody thinks about, hey, where was John Deere buried? Cemeteries were originally meant to be gathering places where people had picnics and took walks and hung out, because not so long ago, as in our last mini episode, people were linked kind of inextricably with death. And they weren't afraid of it. And so families would go to have picnics at cemeteries and walk around. And still, a lot of people do take walks through cemeteries, but they don't think about it exactly in the way that we do nowadays. So just to keep in mind that this particular cemetery I was talking about, people were supposed to gather there. And to writers, cemeteries matter because, and not just to writers, but to everyone, cemeteries matter because they're full of life stories. Like, you can look at a grave, and that may have been somebody who was important or somebody who wasn't important, but they had a story, they had a life. And a lot of my students ended up writing poems about unmarked graves. So they would give that person a life. They would say you're important, like whether or not their life story was correct. They would imagine them as a person, which is totally important because we ended up burying so many people who we don't even know who they were anymore. Cemeteries remark on our fear of mortality. We're all scared of dying, whether or not we admit it. They give us a chance to anthropomorphize death, which is something we're going to find a lot in Neil Gaiman's novels, especially in the Sandman series, and then again in the Graveyard Book. There's symbolism everywhere in cemeteries. Trees mean things. Religious symbols mean things. Grave goods, which are things that people put on graves to honor their dead, whether they're toys or statues or what, flowers, whatever, they all mean things. There are elegies written about the dead, the supernatural. We all have a graveyard myth. We talked about the Black Angel. That is actually one of the Black Angels was in this cemetery, the one that was moved. So there are so many things, basically, the short version, going on in cemeteries. And Neil Gaiman actually covers all of these things in the Graveyard Book. Like, every single one of them. Basically, because Bod is raised by the dead, it lends a real substantiality to the dead. Like, these are people. They're not just head markers. They're people who have characteristics and ways of talking and opinions and things that they do, and they have their own life stories. And because of this, you're not scared. This isn't a scary cemetery. This is a place where just people who happen to have died are now like walking around and doing things and having their own like culture clashes and everything. And very importantly, I think forgotten people are being cared for and humanized by nobody.
Right.
At one point, he says, Bod woke a family of Victorian children who had all died before their 10th birthdays, and they played at hide-and-go-seek in the moonlight in the ivy-twined jungle. So, like, even if it isn't true, in this book, there's a boy who's making families and people important who are important because they're dead and no one knows who they are.
Right.
And then he even remarks on societal and religious problems. This book is supposed to be for ages 10 up. So, obviously, like, a 10-year-old's not going to get at all of this, but there's just so much going on here, and I can tell he did so much research. Basically, they talk about the Potter's Field, where, you know, all the criminals are buried, the people who've been hanged and executed, and there's a witch. And the witch turns out to be Liza Hempstock, who, Rachel, have you read Ocean at the End of the Lane?
I have.
She has the surname of the witches in the ocean at the end of the lane, so she's a relative of them, which is a fucking treasure. Like, I love how he tied that in, and she acts just like a Hempstock, and she's kind of his friend and mentor a bit through this whole thing. So they say Bod shouldn't go to that part of the cemetery because that's where all the bad people are, but you're starting to realize that the dead have the same prejudices that they did when they were alive, and so when Bod goes there, he finds a perfectly nice woman who was burned for witchcraft. And then they also differentiate between the sentient spirits of the dead, like Mrs. Owens and Mr. Owens, and actual ghosts. And Bod's parents, after they're murdered, show up at the cemetery, and Mrs. Owens sees them, and she says, murder creates creatures of panic and naked emotion. So they're, like, not even articulating. They're just these entities of emotion, of panic, and just sorrow. So they haven't even formulated. And actually, Bod's parents never show up at that cemetery as entities. So either they were buried somewhere else, or their case is a different sort of case.
Right.
I feel like I've gone on enough about how important it is to see people who are dead. It's still important, but it also gives usefulness to the dead, because Mrs. Owens is actually raising Bod. She's actually, like, solid. She's tangible, and she can sing him songs and hold him, and the gestures of her day are still relevant to someone who was born today. So, like, anything a person had to offer from 100 years ago is still helpful.
Right.
And he must have spent a lot of time in cemeteries to kind of have these feelings and articulate them in the way he did. They talk about how nature is important to cemeteries because he has some ghost teachers who teach him constellations and everything. And, you know, he's able to hike through the woods without hurting himself. There are some supernatural elements to this, but mostly it's like having the wherewithal and things that kids don't normally learn.
Right.
So then, besides the people who are dead, I really love Neil Gaiman's method of utilizing fairy tale elements in his stories and making them not just for a person of any one age. He does, like, some spins on myths and the supernatural and historical figures. One example, there's a werewolf in this book because he fits everything into this book. Like, his guardian's a vampire named Silas. And then there's a teacher who comes in who's a werewolf named Mrs. Lupescu. And Mrs. Lupescu, I don't know if she says this or someone else says this, but those that men call werewolves or lycanthropes call themselves the hounds of God, as they claim their transformation is a gift from their creator, and they repay the gift with their tenacity, for they will pursue an evildoer to the very gates of hell. So this is a spin on the werewolf myth, where the werewolf is actually useful and is actually a guardian or protector, and I found this is actually a thing. Like, I don't know exactly where it's from, but there's a historical account in Livonia of an old man who was 80 named Theus, who claimed to be a werewolf. And this was in the time of witch hunts and, like, when they would burn and hang werewolves and witches or anyone they suspected to be. So why the hell would he come out? This is from werewolves.com, by the way. I know. Well, he claimed that werewolves weren't monsters or agents of the devil, but rather they were benevolent creatures of God who he called the hounds of God. So obviously Neil Gaiman did his fucking research, and they would go to heaven when they died, and they worked tirelessly to defend the souls of the earth with God's blessing of the werewolf gift. So they'd fight off all the negative entities or what have you, and then they would be rewarded for that. And so that was the type of character that Miss Lupescu was. Then there's the classic personification of death. I haven't read the Sandman novels, but I really like these. Death is the lady on the gray in the Graveyard book, and she's kind of an Epona figure. She's just basically this beautiful lady on horse who has dominion over all of the creatures of the graveyard. And when Bod has a close encounter with the lady on the gray, he asks about her horse, and she says this: "He is gentle enough to bear the mightiest of you away on his broad back, and strong enough for the smallest of you as well." And then Bod says, "Can I ride him?" And she says, one day, everybody does. This is like a really close second to Marcus Zuzak's portrayal of death in the book Thief. Because I really love his death. But this is a good one, too. And then at one point, Bod meets this girl named Scarlet, who, obviously, she's not from the graveyard, and she doesn't understand everything. And he meets her twice, and she's twice scared away, or taken away. So, this is what I got from it. It doesn't matter how slowly you walk the living through the world of the subject of death or the dead. They'll be terrified of it at some basic level.
I think so. And I also think that this book, I mean, she doesn't belong there. I mean, Bod doesn't really belong there.
Mm-hmm.
Though I don't know, well, it's been a few years since I've read it, but I don't remember her ever being necessarily scared of the graveyard.
No.
But just being scared of, I can't remember the name of the monster that they encounter, but...
The Indigo Man or the Sleer?
Sleer, that's it, yeah. But that she can never belong, and Bod doesn't belong. And I think that's a big theme in the book also, is that Bod lives with these ghosts, but he's not one of them. He's still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, it'll get to the point where he can't continue to be there. Like she says, you know, when he asks her if he can ride the horse, she says, well, someday. But, like, not now, because you're still alive. But I don't think he understands.
No, I don't think he does. But, you know what's funny is my last notes were, so they had that dance in the square. I'm not going to explain it. But basically, the dead and the living dance together one night every so many years. And the living won't remember it afterwards. But a dead person, says to Bod, the dead and the living do not mingle, boy. We are no longer part of their world. They are no part of ours.
Right, which is why, I mean, you kind of know that his friendship or whatever with Scarlet is kind of, at least on the first half of the book, because I don't want to give anything away that happens in the second half, but in the first half, you know that it's not going to work out because he is trying to straddle between the graveyard and the real world, and she can't be in the graveyard. I mean, she's not like him, and he's not like anybody else.
Yeah.
It does. It presents a good view, I think, of, like you said, not only how scared people are of death and dead things, but also how it's just something that we as the living can't comprehend. I mean, the idea that one day, like, all of your feelings and thoughts and everything are just going to cease to exist is weird. That's a weird feeling, and that's why people are so scared of it, I think.
The thing with this is they don't cease to exist. They exist very consciously, and they can also affect humans' emotions. They can make them feel fear. They can make them feel cold. They can speak to them if they want, very much want. I just think that, like, with this sort of portrayal of the dead don't always have everything right either. Like, Silas admits to making mistakes with Bod. And although Silas doesn't really apply because he is a person who's neither living nor dead, really straddling everything and can never ever belong to either side because he's a vampire. And in this universe, vampires aren't dead. They're just in a sort of limbo. But right. I don't think the dead always get it right. They often don't understand how they can affect the lives of the living.
Well, no, and I think that's part of it, is that they've been dead for so long that they've almost forgotten.
Because they have a living boy, they appeared to a living boy, they raised a living boy, they taught him lessons, they very much affected his life, and they don't believe that they count anymore. And Bod walks away from that graveyard as a medium between the living and the dead, having both the lessons from the living and the dead. And therefore he's like double resourceful. And he isn't afraid of taking risks because he does not fear dying. Because he knows what happens to you when you die, and he knows who a dead person is. And I think he knows ultimately that he can be useful as a dead person and as a living person. And I think that when he does die, maybe in my mind, like Graveyard Book 2, Bod is dead, and he rallies the graveyard, and they all try to make a difference, and they all hug, and everyone's good.
Yeah, I mean, it does explore some interesting themes about death. I don't know that I got the sense from the book, though, that everyone, becomes a ghost, I guess.
No, not everyone does. Like, some graves are silent.
Right, like his parents.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, and so it still plays into that fear of dying. Well, you don't know that you're going to become a ghost. I don't remember, and you can probably tell me, but I don't know if they get into how much they remember from when they were alive. Like, how much of their lives they remember.
I think they remember everything, but that's my opinion because,
They don't get into it, really.
No, but Mrs. Owens knows songs from when she was alive. I think they have, and of course they still retain all their manners and the way they communicate and everything, so...
All the personality traits.
But no, he didn't specifically get into how much, do I remember how I died, but obviously if it wasn't written on the gravestone, then Bod was regaled with all these tales of how they died. And, oh, no, I think they do, because there was that adventurer who Bod would go to see, and the adventurer would tell him about all of his
Oh, that's right.
exploits. That's right. Well, but I guess you don't know if those are true, so I suppose you could say, like, maybe he's making them up. You don't know.
Well, I always thought that, and I thought that was interesting. I mean, like you said, if it wasn't written on the gravestone how they died, he got all of these stories, but I never necessarily, I guess, got the sense that any of them really remembered how they died. That they just made up their own version, which is fine. I don't know. But, yeah, no, that book was great. I loved it.
It is so much more complex than I expected when I picked that thing up, and I should have known better. But...
And it's definitely one, though, if you are a kid and you read it would be really fun. It's just like a mystery adventure story, and you don't have to understand the deeper themes of the book to get the book.
No, you don't.
Well, I know kids love this book.
I don't know any kids personally who have said, I love this book, but I can imagine as a kid, because of course now I can't get rid of my analytical side. It's something I'll have to live with forever.
We all read it as adults. I mean, I only read it as an adult. It wasn't out when I was a kid.
But I could see loving it as a kid because the kid side of me went, like, I reached the twist and I went, oh my god.
The only books I've actually read by Neil Gaiman are his 2 children's books, so there you go. I started American Gods and never finished it, and now I just watch the show. But Coraline also is the same way. And if you read it, again, it obviously was not out when I was a child, so I never had the opportunity to read it. But if you read it as a kid, it's a really great, I can imagine, scary adventure story. You find all of these more complex themes and ideas in it.
I did read it when I was a kid, and all I remember of Coraline was like, oh, their mother has buttons for eyes.
Right.
Fuck!
Oh, yeah. Oh, Other Mother is scary. And in the movie, Other Mother is really scary. But I only read it as an adult. Wasn't out when I was a kid, or if it was, I guess I wasn't aware of it. I don't know what year it came out. But it definitely... As an adult, when you read it, there are deeper themes to it that I feel like you wouldn't get as a kid. But again, that's the mark of a good children's book.
Yeah.
Or middle grade book, I guess both of these would be. It's enjoyable as a kid, and it's enjoyable for a different reason when you're an adult. They're both valid reasons to like the book. If you only read The Graveyard Book as a kid, and you never wanted to reread it as an adult and analyze it, you could still have great memories of that book and have enjoyed that book just as much.
Oh, yeah.
As an adult did. So I should really read some of his other books. I think I have... Oh, wait, I read Good Omens, which is hysterical. You should read it.
That's the one with Terry Pratchett, right?
Yeah. Oh, my... About the witch who can predict the end of the world or something.
Oh, God, I need to read that.
It's hysterical. Like, I was crying reading it because I was laughing so hard. But that's his only other book that I've read.
I almost cried at the end of both Ocean at the End of the Lane and The Graveyard Book.
Oh, I definitely cried at the end of The Graveyard Book. I mean, that has, like, a goodbye in it. I can't take it. So
I was at work.
I always cry. For example, I have never seen the movie E.T. because I know how it ends. So I'm just like, why would I put myself through that? I think my boyfriend and I were talking about the other day, and I was like, why would I put myself through that?
I had to keep myself together because I was at work, and I was like, I'm gonna cry now. Nope, not gonna cry. Can't do that.
There was a book one time that I was reading at the book rack, and I started getting all teary, and I was like, I have to put it down now. And I put it down, and I cried when I got home and finished it. But that's always embarrassing when you're in public.
I know, and it always seems to happen when you're in public, too. Great books, both of them.
Both of them, amazing books. And both, again, by authors that have large bibliographies, so you have a lot to choose from if you like these books.
Neil Gaiman won the Newbery Medal for The Graveyard Book, and he said he was super surprised because he didn't think this was the type of book that was winning the medal at the time, so he was, like, just shocked when he got it. And he said, like, there's a copy of his speech for it in the back of the book, and it says, like, basically, I got to be cool to my children, and you are never cool to your children, so thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's another example of children's books and how they can deal with deeper, I mean, even kids have a fear of death, especially because they don't understand it as much as adults. I mean, most kids have not had to deal with death in the same way that adults have. You know, I mean, your grandparents die sometimes when you're a kid, but in your mind, you're like, well, yeah, but they're old. So it's not as, you know, as you get older and people your own age start dying, that's when it starts to get really complicated.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I think this does a good job of exploring those themes for kids and helping kids understand kind of what death is, and that it's just a natural, it happens, everything dies. It's a natural process. Now, that doesn't mean that, again, not everyone is terrified of death, because everybody is, but...
The episode we did, the mini episode, is about a game that is trying to normalize death in our culture, because people used to die so much more often than they used to. Like, everybody dies eventually, but people used to die when they were 10, when they were 16, when they were, you know,
right.
Of all these diseases that were wiping out people, and in childbirth, and as infants, and so death was so integral to our culture, and it should be now still, because it's something everybody's going to do one day. It's our final achievement, but yet we push it away and we say nope, and we're not going to talk about it, we're not going to think about it, and we're going to try not to do it and put it off as far as we possibly can.
Right.
So I think it's really important for books like this to exist, like not necessarily as horror books, like books with certain elements of spookiness or whatever, but not as books that are meant to scare the shit out of your kids. They're meant to teach your kids something useful about their life. So,
yep. And another, like, small theme of this book, and it doesn't get into it as much, but a little bit that I found in it is the idea of almost when you have the child, it feels like, well, now if I die, there's still a piece of me out there. And that's how I felt with the Owens raising Bod, is that even though, spoiler, because stop listening if you don't want to know how the book ends, spoiler, but even though he leaves the graveyard at the end, like you said, he takes their lessons with him, and so they have been able to pass along things that they have learned to him, and he's able to carry that out into the world.
Yeah, and they were childless, I believe, because there was never any mention of, like, usually the children are buried with them.
Yeah, they never mentioned that they had children when they were alive, but that is a common theme, is that once you have children, it's like, well, but when I die, my legacy will be carried on. There'll be someone that remembers me, which I think is another big fear that people have of dying, is that, well, when I'm dead, who's going to ever remember that I existed?
Mm-hmm.
Another book that deals really well with this is not necessarily horror, The Lovely Bones. A book that I will just randomly find myself thinking about, especially at the end where she says, my name was Susie Salmon. I was here for a minute and then I was gone.
Oh my God, I have goosebumps.
That's like, you're here for a minute and then you're gone. And that's it. I think that's where a big fear of death comes from, is this idea that you're not, in the grand scheme of things, you're not here for very long. Like I said, you know, that's just that fear, I think, of your thoughts, your feelings, your hopes, your dreams, they all just end. Just one day, they're just gone forever. I think people have this fear of, well, then why was I even here?
Like, does it matter? It doesn't matter.
Oh, God, this is too much. This is too overwhelming right now.
I know. Oh, my God.
I think that this book does a good job of dealing with that, of, like, you know, yes, they're dead, but they have managed to pass their legacy on now to someone else who can take it and who can carry it into the future. Just presumably, if Bod were to marry and have children, he would be able to pass those same lessons on to them. So it's just a way of keeping things going kind of forever.
Yeah. Neil Gaiman and Alice Sebold need to get together and write a children's version of The Lovely Bones.
They do.
Because, like, there's a lot of things that I couldn't see putting in a children's book, of course, in The Lovely Bones, because of the nature of the crime and everything. But there are so many things in The Lovely Bones that I think, just like The Graveyard Book and just like Wait Till Helen Comes, could just resound with children. Because it's a child. It's an experience that a child is having, and that experience is valid, and we can't shut off the bad experiences, like Rachel said, from the good ones. We can't shut out the bad experiences and say they don't happen, because that's doing an injustice or an inservice to our children.
Right. It's too much.
So many things, Rachel. How was this supposed to happen? Like, how did this happen?
I want to read The Lovely Bones now, but also I don't, because I can't read anything about kids getting hurt right now.
Oh, God, I can't even imagine.
No, I definitely, like I said, I think when we talked about Pet Sematary, I mentioned that I had reread it. I already knew I was pregnant. I was like, I'm probably reading this book for the last time ever. I'm going to enjoy it, and then probably never ever pick it up again as long as I live.
I think you could probably pick it up after the child was, like, in the teens.
No, my dad tried to read it when it came out, and my brother would have been 11 or 12 maybe, and he couldn't do it. He saw the movie and it was too much. And
I bet your brother was like, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to run out on the road anytime soon, just relax, Dad.
I think what disturbed my dad, and probably a lot of parents with that book, is at the end where he has to kill his own child. I think even more so than the child dying, it's at the end when he brings the child back, because who wouldn't do that? Literally every human being would. I cannot think of a person who would not do that. Possibly extremely religious people would not do that, but...
Well, yeah, because some of them won't even take him to the doctor to get him fixed, so...
Well, I'm thinking, if they're in a better place or whatever now.
Yeah, it's in God's hands.
But if... I cannot think of anyone else that would not... I mean, people wouldn't even hesitate to bring their child back if they could.
No.
But then he has to kill his own kid, and I think that's what got my dad. My dad, he's a pretty tough guy, but also he's a super sensitive, so I think that's what got him.
I read that book when I was 12, and it ruined me.
Harry?
Yes.
I read it when I was like 14, maybe. I read it on, actually my dad and I had gone to Chicago for the weekend, so we were up here, and then he had to stay up here for work, and so I had to take the Amtrak home by myself, and I read it on the Amtrak on the way home.
That's still the book that scares me the most in the world. I can't exactly tell you what it is about it. You have to experience it for yourself, because I think it's something very special that Stephen King does with his wording, and... Everything he does with it is just it gets at the thing you're most afraid of, and
and that's what's so good about his. We're so far off topic, but
Stephen King again. God damn it!
Again, but that's what's so good about so many of his books is that Pet Sematary. I liked it. I loved it actually, but it didn't hit in a specific fear for me. Whereas The Shining did. The Shining hit into a very specific fear for me. So that's what's good about his books, is that they're so good into tapping into different people's fears.
Right. Because The Shining, I thought it was a great book, but it didn't scare me at all. Like, the thing I was most afraid of was those goddamn hedge animals moving.
Oh.
You stay the fuck where you are, hedge animal.
No. For me it was... But it's just different people with different fears and different life experiences. and really not just his books, but any horror book, horror movie can really tap into. Like me with The Exorcist. Man, that movie scared the shit out of me. I would never watch that. You couldn't pay me to watch that movie again.
Really?
Oh my god. Well, I think I talked about it.
Yeah, you did. I know you talked about the book, but I think we touched on the movie a little bit too, and that.
You could not pay me to watch that movie again. I bought that movie on DVD for $1 from a library sale. Now, I saw this movie when I was like 16, and I was like maybe 21 or 22 when I bought it on DVD, and I started watching it. I got 45 minutes in, and I was like, what the fuck am I doing? And I turned it off, and I have never watched it since, and I never would. That movie scared the shit out of me. But again, it taps into a very specific fear that I have, which is I don't believe that possession is real, but like, what if it is?
I wonder how much, because I think I read or heard somewhere that The Exorcist was the first movie to experiment with subliminal noises, where they would use the sound of bees or the sound of like an animal getting slaughtered or something, and it would be just so low-key in the background. And it's like something that registers in your brain, but you may not even notice it. Yeah. Like, I wonder how much that got to you. Because
that's part of it, but some of it is the possession, because that's the same reason that Paranormal Activity scared me so much. I don't necessarily believe that you can be possessed by a demon or a ghost, but, like, what if you can? Like, that's my fear. It's like, I don't believe it, but, like, what if it is real?
Of course.
So this fear that it's real, I think, is that, because Paranormal Activity, that's another one. I've never seen the sequels. I wouldn't watch them. They're probably not as scary, but I would never watch them. I would never rewatch the original.
Right.
I was shaking when I left the movie theater after seeing Paranormal Activity.
Ooh.
And then my whole ex-boyfriend made fun of me all night by going, what's that noise?
Oh.
It's scaring the shit out of me.
Well, he was acting just like the guy in the movie, apparently.
That's what I said. And in the movie, the boyfriend made fun of her and he died. So
well, that's what he gets. You're gonna eat his heart. That was what was supposed to happen.
Okay. Back on topic to YA horror. I'm trying to think of another book that I didn't pick that I would really recommend. Well, my best friend's Exorcism.
I was gonna do Blood and Chocolate, but I didn't want to talk about werewolves again, because I felt like I was gonna recycle that, like especially female werewolves. But that is a phenomenal book. I loved it so much. And it's YA, not children's. I think it's definitely meant for like a preteen to teen audience.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that
and above.
For teens. Another one that came out a few years ago called Anna Dressed in Blood.
I've heard of that.
Very good. That's another one that I was between Anna Dressed in Blood, the one that I picked, which now is escaping me because I'm very tired. Wait till Helen comes. Oh my god, that's humiliating. And then an anthology that I read a few years ago that, again, the title's escaping me. Oh my god, I am so tired. The title is...
Slasher Girls and Monster Boys?
That's it, yes.
I want to read it, but it's never coming into the store.
Girls and Monster Boys, which... See, and again, I bought it for my... So in October, I try and only read horror books. So I bought it for my Kindle. That's a really good one. It's short stories by a bunch of different authors. Some of them are iffy, but some of them are great.
That's what I heard.
Are great. So that's another one that I would highly, highly recommend, especially if you like short stories. They're pretty fun, and they actually made me seek out other books by some of the authors. The stories that I really liked, I checked out some of their other books.
Ooh.
And really enjoyed it. So if you want, if you're interested in any of these authors, I would recommend reading this first, because then you do get a sense of their writing style, and you can kind of see if it's a book that you would like or not. But now I kind of want to reread this. Maybe I'll reread it now. I need to read a book right now. Finish a book, so...
Yeah. So our episode next week is female murderers.
Like real-life female murderers?
Real-life female murderers. A lot of the time, we cover male true crime. What?
Like, everyone's going to pick the same one, because there's, like, one famous female serial killer.
Okay, Elizabeth Bathory doesn't count.
One.
I have a book on female murderers, so there's so many.
I guess I was just thinking serial killers, and I'm like, there's
Who are you thinking of?
Eileen Wuornos.
Eileen. Oh, duh, of course.
Has there been another one?
Oh, hell yes. There have been tons.
Of female serial killers?
Mm-hmm.
They're so rare.
Have you heard of Dorothea Puentes?
Oh, yeah, that sounds kind of familiar.
She's the one who, like, basically, she had a home for older people and would, like, poison them and take their money, and then she did, like, 60 or something.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That reminds me of actually a really hilarious movie called Arsenic and Old Lace.
All you have to do is Google, it doesn't have to be female serial killers, female murderers. Any one murder that's interesting or whatever. There's tons. I guarantee you will fall down a rabbit hole, and there's a lot more.
I know who I'm going to do, because I'm looking at this Wikipedia page, American Female Murderers. Thank you, Wikipedia.
Because there are even child female murderers.
Oh, yeah, but I don't want to get into child killings right now.
Like children who kill people.
That's what I mean.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that could be worse. You're right.
I'd rather not.
I will try not to do one of those, because I know of one of them. I'll try to find something I haven't heard before, so that variety happens.
But okay, I think I know what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, so we're gonna talk about female murderers, and just see where it goes from there. And in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing a t-shirt giveaway. So if you would like a podcast t-shirt, Miranda has designed some bitchin' ones, and you can win one if you participate in our contest. We will provide details later on that as to how to win.
Let me tell you, I received my t-shirt in the mail today, and it's really great. So
yeah.
It's really cute.
So Miranda hid from us that she's, like, super talented.
I know! She's like, here, I just, like, drew this thing. And I'm like, okay, that's cool.
And then one day she showed up with a t-shirt for our podcast, and we were like, oh my god, Miranda.
On Facebook, she's like, here, I made this design. I'm like, well, that's great. Thank you.
Well, when she got here, she was like, should I tell Rachel? And I was like, yes, you should tell Rachel.
Yes. I looked at it and I was like, that's amazing.
Yeah. Damn, she's good. So now the problem is, I keep going, Miranda, you should, like, draw this. You should totally draw this for a t-shirt. This would be great if you could do this. But she hates me now.
But yes, I have my t-shirt. It's great. I can't wear it right now because my stomach is too big. But I purposefully got it in a size that I could wear after the baby was born. So
I've been wearing it a lot, and I think I need to wash it now.
So. Yeah, I like tried it on, and I was like, this is not going to go over my belly, so I will have to wait. But they're really, really nice.
They're awesome.
And they're sparkly, so anything with sparkles. A sparkly horror t-shirt.
A sparkly horror t-shirt? Yes. If you want to win one of those, just tune in for details about that, which we will provide next week. And it probably won't be too hard, and to be honest, there probably won't be too much competition, so you should probably do an entry. Yeah, so that's all we got.
That's all we got, guys.
That's all we got.
Been off topic like 10 times. I don't know how much of it's going to make it in. But
I don't know. We'll see how I'm feeling when I edit stuff in a couple days. God, I fucking hate editing now. I hate it. I'm like, I don't want to listen to my voice anymore. It sucks. I hate listening
to myself.
I almost died during the Evil Dead episode. I was like, oh shit, this is so long. How do I edit this? I don't know. It was a good episode, but when you have to listen to every single second of it and go, should this go in and should this not? Like, how should this be leveled? Blah, blah. I can't imagine how it feels for people who actually know what they're doing when they edit audio, because
I can't either.
Goodbye. We still don't have an official bye for this, so
I don't think we need one.
No, do we need one?
No.
Bye.
We don't have a song. No.
No. Bye.